Folks, I just want to say welcome to the Central Coast Economic Forecast. I am so grateful you're here. I'm so impressed. We are all busy people, but you folks have given up 3 hours of your morning today because you care. You want to be informed, you want to be educated, you want to make smart decisions about your business, about our local communities, about the nonprofits you're all involved in and run perhaps. And I just think that's really admirable. So thank you for giving your time. Thank you for caring for our community and being here this morning. Applause to you guys. We got a lot of infotainment for you this morning. That's what I like to call it, infotainment. It's information that's actually fun. It's been a really big year. There are a lot of things to reflect on and to ponder. You know, once again, the stock market is at all-time highs. Space exploration, booming. I think they launched 3 rockets since the timer started going off this morning. AI continues to grow. You remember last year I read my introduction that was generated by ChatGPT. This year I'm actually not human. This is a robot. The real Ryan Caldwell is up at the spa. So AI advancing, very nice. And gosh, I think the only thing advancing faster than the technology sector seems to be the hot chicken sector. Have you guys noticed this? I don't want any NVIDIA in my portfolio. I want to find some hot chicken for my portfolio. It is on fire. Muy caliente. En fuego. But I wanted to use my platform this morning to kind of address an elephant in the room. I want to get a little serious with you all this morning because, frankly, the amount of political discord in our community is at troubling levels. I have seen neighbors turn against neighbors. I've seen families torn apart. And I just want to address it at the front end. You know, we've got 2 sides in this community. One side looks at the last 4 years and they just get red hot if you talk about the changes and the improvements that were made. The other side doesn't seem to relate. They don't seem to understand. And we have got to come together on this, you guys. We cannot let protected bike lanes be the issue that divides this community. Okay? Can we all just simmer down a little bit? Can we come together on this? It's got to stop. It's got to stop. Thank you. All right, with that aside, we're going to jump right into our program. As you know, hopefully, that the Central Coast Economic Forecast is put on by an all-volunteer board. They work hard all year long for this moment, for these 3 hours, so that you guys can leave here informed and entertained. And it's a lot of work. There's interviews that go on, there's all this planning, there's all this thought that goes into today. And leading that group of people is the courageous Jolie Ditmore of Bay Consultants. I'd like to welcome Jolie to the stage and share some remarks from the board of the Central Coast Economic Forecast. Mm-hmm.
Good morning. I'm Greg Bland, President of Bank of America, San Luis Obispo region. Thank you for joining us this morning and to the team for organizing this thoughtful event. At Bank of America, we are committed to responsible growth, delivering both profits and purpose. We support the success of our clients, the well-being of our teammates, the strength of our communities, and the strong returns for our shareholders. We direct our talent, innovation, and resources to make a local impact and fulfill our purpose of making financial lives better. We support nonprofits like REACH, working to transform our region into the next clean energy hub. Volunteer with Habitat for Humanity, SLO Food Bank, and Earthshine to better our community, and offer financial literacy and home buying workshops to students and nonprofit staff. We also provide our business clients with national expertise at a local level. I'm proud that Bank of America could help sponsor the Central Coast Economic Forecast, and I'm eager to learn from today's presenters. And now, on to the forecast.
Thank you, Bank of America. And the board would like to formally thank Chair Jolie Ditmore. Let's hear it for Jolie. Thank you, Jolie, all your hard work. I understand it's a lot of cats to wrangle, so well done, you made it. Excellent. Well, I have a few housekeeping items for you all before we get into our program. The first is that you can expect, after today's program, 3 things to hit your inbox. Okay, one thing is going to be a copy of today's presentation. So you don't need to feel the pressure to take pictures and notes. You are going to get a copy of the material presented to you today. You are also going to receive a link to a video of today's presentation. So if you need to step out, take a call, and you're afraid to miss something, we would rather you step out, use the restroom, don't have an accident. You're going to get the video, okay? And then the last thing is going to be a survey. Remember, this is for you. We want to be of value to you. So share your feedback. Tell us how we did. Tell us how we can improve the Central Coast Economic Forecast. That survey is coming to your inbox. As I alluded to in my previous grotesque comment, we will not be taking breaks today. We are going to go hard with the infotainment. So if you need to step outside, if you need to use the facilities, please do so. If you want to stand in the back and maybe get a yoga session in, that is totally fine. The other thing I would like to call out is that we are going to have a Q&A session. And you, the audience, can submit your questions to Niree and Chris, Dr. Thornberg, by sending an email to ccefquestions@gmail.com. The email address is at the bottom of your program. So at any moment during either of their presentations, pull out your phone, send an email. What's the email address again? Oh, it's on my program, and we will attempt to get to all of your questions today. Very good? All right, wonderful. Well, let's jump right in. I am so excited to introduce Dr. Niree Kodaverdian. Niree's a research manager with Beacon Economics. She's bringing 2 decades of economic experience analyzing regional economies, public policy, housing, real estate throughout California. Of course, she holds a PhD from the University of Southern California, specializing in behavioral economics. She's a published researcher with the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization. She's also co-authored a report on California, specifically about the minimum wage with Dr. Thornberg. Prior to joining, she actually taught at the Agrios Business College at Chapman. Did I say that right? And she has been recognized for her in-depth knowledge and insight into California's economy. So for our local report this morning, please help me welcome Dr. Niree Kodaverdian.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Arduous, but that's fine. So yes, my name is Dr. Niree Kodaverdian, and I'm really happy to be here. Though Ryan mentioned most of what I would introduce about myself, And sorry, where's the clicker? This? Okay, got it. Though he mentioned most of what I would introduce about myself, something he didn't mention is that I was actually an intern with Beacon Economics almost 15 years ago, which is about the same amount of time that a lot of you have been working with Beacon Economics. So here is a sample of the projects that Beacon has done with cities within San Luis Obispo as well as with the county itself. And despite the deep knowledge base that Beacon Economics has built over time collaborating with these jurisdictions, in preparation for my talk today, I gathered some valuable insights from local businessmen and women and leaders within the community. So thank you very much for everyone that spent time with me, giving me their insights. So I've added that into my presentation today. Okay, so what am I going to be speaking about? Well, I'll start off with GDP, what's been going on with real GDP, as well as the components of GDP. So what is contributing to real GDP in the county? And by the way, I do focus mostly on the county, but there is a breakdown by city in one of my slides. So wherever you do see San Luis Obispo and it doesn't say county, it is referring to the county. After that, I'll go into some trends, specifically labor, demographics, and housing, and we'll wrap up with some actionable recommendations for all of you to take away from the talk today. Okay, so looking at real GDP. This is a comparison from 2017 to 2022. And San Luis Obispo, by the way, in all my graphs, I'll show with the same color so that it's easier for you to track. And that's going to be dark blue. So we do see that there's been some growth in real GDP, though as you could see, it's not as significant as the growth that we're seeing on average in California. So California is the dashed line all the way on top. Comparing some of the counties around here, we do see that the growth San Luis Obispo has had is more than Salinas and Napa, for example. However, in the last 5 years, again, we haven't grown as much as California as a whole. So looking at the contributions to real GDP by sector, here we could see that what is contributing most to GDP here is actually finance, real estate, and insurance. So that's number one. Number two is utilities, which is obviously Diablo. And I have retail there as a benchmark, so we can just have a point of comparison. And agriculture is shown with the grape symbol there. But on a location quotient basis, so what you're seeing here is basically showing you the comparative advantage that we have in San Luis Obispo relative to California. So anything greater than 1, all these sectors that are greater than 1, they are all things that the county has a comparative advantage in producing. So number 1 is actually agriculture, and number 2 is hospitality. Construction is not far behind, so that means there's a lot of potential for growth here, and I'll come back to construction later on. So looking at our key sectors now, starting off with agriculture. So the first graph is showing us crop production generally, and that is going from 2013 to 2023. So there's clearly a significant upward trend. Okay, so how much we are producing in terms of agriculture has been increasing significantly over the last decade, which is great. When we look at the breakdown by crop, we can see what's been going on in the last year. So this is the 1-year change, this last column. And what you see is that in the last year, we've had a significant drop-off in vegetable production, like broccoli and cauliflower. But that has been more than offset by the production in animal crops, cattle and calves. So that's great news for your beautiful steakhouse at Madonna Inn, which I was lucky enough to get a chance to dine at yesterday, but I heard I missed on the cake, so I need to go back. Okay, so what about wine grapes? There's also significant growth in wine grapes over the last year. So we're talking about nearly 24% increase in production of wine grapes. And you could see that as well in the last 10 years. So not only do we have a 10-year upward trend in how much we're producing in terms of wine grapes, but we also have a significant one-year change in wine grape production. So that's all great news. And my animation there. Okay, so what about the price of wine? I just thought this was interesting to show. So this is for a variety of white and red wines, and it's showing us what the dollar per ton is for these different wine grape crops in the county over time. So in the last decade, it looks like nearly all wine grape crops have experienced a significant increase in price, except for Pinot Noir for some reason. But that did start significantly higher, so perhaps it's just converging to the price of other wine grape crops. We are actually working on a wine study currently with Paso Robles, which we're really excited about. And I'm personally excited to be working on some other projects in the future that we hope to have in collaboration with the county and cities within. Okay, so our first quote is from Paul Clark from the Farm Bureau. And what he pointed out is even though we have sky-high grocery prices, so the price of wine grape crops are going up, the prices on the shelves at grocery stores are also going up, that's not necessarily coming back to the farmer. And this is especially squeezing the smallest farmers in the area, and they're finding themselves forced to either sell or lease their land. Water scarcity is another issue, and so the Farm Bureau is a voice for ag because when it comes to water rights, non-ag seems to have a greater political voice. Okay, so moving on to our second key sector in the area, which is hospitality. So hotel occupancy rates have stayed about the same in the last year. So there is a slight drop off, negative 0.6%, but that's not really significant. It's about the same as what it was last year. There are a lot of new hotel rooms coming online in the next 18 months, as pointed out by Clint Pierce of the Madonna Inn, as well as he has a lot of other ventures in the community, a lot of other commercial business ventures. So he did point out that there are a lot of hotel rooms coming online, which will, in the short term, have a negative impact, of course, on occupancy rates of existing hotels. But as this area becomes a place with a greater cluster of hotels, that's going to draw in more people because they have more options. So in the long term, that is beneficial for the existing hotels. As far as tax receipts for leisure and hospitality, we're seeing that these have increased significantly as compared to pre-pandemic. So if you look at 2019 versus where we are now, obviously there is a significant increase since then. However, as you could see, there isn't much difference in the last year. Even in the last 2-3 years, we don't see much difference in tax receipts from leisure and hospitality. And Kathy from Visit SLOCAL was correct in noticing this and pointing it out in our interview when she mentioned that when we look at spend and average length of stay, they are about the same as a year ago. So the question is this a new normal for the area, or is there potential for growth? The tax receipts being stagnant is not something unique to the hospitality industry. We're seeing that across the board. So even though there is a significant increase in tax receipts compared to pre-pandemic, where we are now is pretty much where we were a year ago and where we were 2 years ago. However, despite the stagnancy in consumption, essentially, we have significant wage growth in San Luis Obispo. Even though there was a decrease between 2016 and 2019, as you could see right there, there's a decrease, there's been significant amounts of growth since then, and the county has caught up to the other nearby coastal economies. Most of this income growth is happening for post-grads. Overall, it's true that median household income is going up, and again, I have some other communities, some other economies here for comparison. So we see that they're all pretty much tracking. Median household income is going up from 2005 to 2023 in all of these economies. But most of the income growth is happening for those with a graduate or professional degree, so those with head of household jobs. And this is specifically for San Luis Obispo County. As we could see, those with less than high school degrees see a negative change, and those with a high school diploma are also experiencing a negative change in their household income. So those that are more educated are driving this trend of increasing median household income, which is actually different than what is happening in California as a whole, and Dr. Thornberg will address that in his slides. Okay, what about employment? So income is going up, but employment is actually not changed from where it was in 2019. So if you look at this graph on the left, and we're looking at San Luis Obispo, the blue line, you could see that where we are today is pretty much where we were pre-pandemic. So even though income is going up, employment has not changed since where we were pre-pandemic. The unemployment rate is also pretty much where it was pre-pandemic. And I should point out that actually the unemployment rate here is relatively low compared to the rest of California. So in the rest of California, the unemployment rate is about 5.3% as of the last reading. And here in the county, your unemployment rate is pretty low. It's right above 4%, which is closer to the national average. But even though at first glance, this might appear to be a good thing, it could also indicate that there just aren't people looking for jobs, that people have left the labor force here, and they're just not looking for jobs in this county. So this is just I would say, a superficial reading on what's going on in the labor force. We want to also consider the actual labor force numbers. And as we could see, the labor force dropped off significantly with the pandemic, and it hasn't really recovered. So again, we're considering the dark blue line. So you can see that there was a significant drop-off with the pandemic. There has been some recovery, but it's like plateaued for the last few years. So it's not surprising that we're not seeing growth in our tax receipts for hospitality and across sectors, because our labor force isn't increasing. You need workers in order to supply things for people to buy. And Kathy, again, is quoted here. Labor is certainly an issue. We have a lot of workers that live in Santa Maria, which I know it belongs to 2 counties, and the housekeeping staff especially. This is especially common in South County, but that transportation piece is a problem. So the question is either how do we get housekeeping staff to be able to live in the county or to live closer to where they're working, or to be able to transport more easily to their job every day. Okay, and here we have another quote from Clint. The rising minimum wage has had an impact. And that is something we are seeing across California, so it's not unique to the county. Actually, the white paper that I co-authored with Dr. Thornberg is specifically about the impact of minimum wage on unemployment in California. And what we find in that paper is that the rising minimum wage has caused unemployment to increase in California, specifically for the youngest workers, for teenagers, and that's driving up the unemployment rate in California. So part of the issue could, of course, be that. And with Proposition 32 on the ballot, this problem could, of course, be exacerbated. So, but that's just part of the issue. Another big problem is that our population is not growing. So, of course, if our population isn't growing, then we don't have enough people to be in the labor force. And again, this is also not something that's uncommon in California as a whole. Population has not been growing in the last few years in California, so this is something that is just happening statewide. 1 year change, we can see that there is a negative ½ percentage point change in the population in San Luis Obispo County, whereas in California there was a little bit of an increase. And the 10-year change is also different, so you could see that San Luis Obispo County is not growing as fast as the rest of California, and it's certainly not growing as much as we would like if we want our labor force to keep growing and if we want, in turn, GDP to keep growing. So because our population isn't growing, our median age is going up in the county. And I get it. I mean, if I was living here, there's no reason I would want to retire anywhere else. This is such a beautiful place with gorgeous landscapes. So it makes sense. We're seeing that the median age is higher here than in California, and in both places we do see that median age is rising. So compared to California, there's a higher median age here, but even compared to itself 10 years ago, we see that the age is increasing. It's shifting more towards 65 and over, and our 24 and under is slightly less than where it was a decade ago. 45 to 64 is also less than where it was a decade ago. Okay, so why is our population not growing? I can't really make out one answer, but housing, exactly. So we're not building enough housing. Although there is a great effort in 2022, so we could see how residential permits were going down up until 2022. There was a significant effort in 2022, as well as in 2023, though there seems to be a decline since then. So this right here, these two bars, they're comparing where we were year to date in 2023, so on November 1st, 2023, versus where we are now in 2024. So we could see that year to date, comparison-wise, we are lower in terms of permits than where we were a year ago. And here you can see the comparison across different counties. So the 1 year change we see is negative here, but in Merced, for example, there's a significant increase in the number of permits that have been issued. And this is broken down by single family in light green and in multifamily on top. So there is a nice effort, which I'll touch on again, to develop more multifamily housing. So that's all great, actually. So here's a relevant quote from Cam Boyd from the Coastal Community Builders. And he points out that the supply of entitled single-family land has essentially dried up in the county. And so they find themselves shifting more towards mixed use and multifamily projects, which is exactly what we would want to see in order to make housing more affordable, in order to grow population, in turn grow labor force and GDP. Okay, and looking at home inventory and sales, we could see that active listings have gone down significantly since the pandemic. That's called being in golden handcuffs. People are happy with where they are. Their mortgage rates are lower than what is currently available on the market. With Prop 13, of course, property taxes are also lower than what it would be otherwise. So we have people staying put where they are, even if they might have otherwise wanted to downsize. So people are just staying where they are because there aren't enough affordable options to allow for people to move. And this is called filtering in real estate. So we're not seeing the filtering happen here because of a lack of housing. Of course, home sales are going to go down if active listings are down. It's just a matter of demand and supply. If we don't have the supply, then even if the demand is there, we can't meet it. And home prices, as we would expect with a lack of supply, they've been going up. So when supply goes down and or demand goes up, prices go up. So that's exactly what we're seeing here. Yeah, and we can compare the one-year change in San Luis Obispo County with what's been going on in other counties. So since February 2020, actually, San Luis Obispo County has had the greatest increase in median home prices compared to all these other counties. So there's a significant increase in how expensive it is to buy a house. Rebecca Campbell from SLO County Administrative Office pointed out that great regional partnerships within the cities, with the county, with REACH, and with SLOCOG are actually putting more housing on the line. They've put together a housing framework, which was recently adopted, so congratulations. And a lot of housing developments, including affordable housing, will be coming online in the near future. As we would expect, affordability has become more of an issue. So home prices have gone up. Affordability has also been affected in the rental market. So we could see that the apartment cost of rent has increased, though it is lower in San Luis Obispo as it is compared to some other coastal economies. However, when we look at the San Luis Obispo metropolitan area, we see that the share of cost-burdened renters is higher here relative to the US and California, which is not something that we would, or I should say it's not unexpected. So taking the fact that income is going up and population is not, and there is a lack of available housing, well, what that tells us is one thing. The number of people per household has been going down. And that's something that happens when people have the money to do so. So people here, we do have median income going up, as I showed earlier. They have the option to spread out. So that's exactly what we're seeing. And I have a joke here, but I might be stealing it from Dr. Thornberg, so I'll say it anyway. What are the 3 things you don't want to live with if you don't have to? So, okay, I'll go ahead and say it. Roaches, rats, and roommates. So that's exactly what's happening here. People have the ability to move out, and they're doing that. So there's less people per household. That's just a sign of affluence. That's not a bad thing. But we want to give people who are working and supporting our key sectors the option to continue living here and growing here so that the economy can continue growing here. Okay, so in conclusion, I have a few actionable recommendations, and I also have the last quote here from Paul. He pointed out that it's always been an objective of farming to do more with less. There's always been this symbiotic relationship between technology and agriculture in the agricultural industry, and it's continuously evolving, starting with John Deere all the way to now with leveraging AI to improve efficiency. And that's exactly the kind of thing we want to do. Given the fact that our labor force isn't growing, one of the actionable recommendations would be to increase short-term worker productivity through something like AI, leveraging AI. So that is great. That's one of our recommendations. The other ones would be to focus on multifamily home development. I think I hammered it home with, no pun intended, with why we need to develop more housing. We want to build more retirement communities to allow for that natural filtering process in real estate to occur here so that people can downsize if they want to and continue living in this beautiful area, but also allow for other families, younger families, to move in and continue supporting and growing the economy. And maybe build better transportation infrastructure for those workers that are living on the border of the county or even outside the county to be able to more efficiently commute in and out on a daily basis. And maybe don't close Diablo. As you guys saw, this is a big contributor to the local GDP. So I know there's plans to close it. There were initial plans to close it, and now it's staying open, but it's planned to close in 2030 from what I understand. So maybe let's not close that. Okay, so thank you very much. And we have a QR code here as well, but I understand that the slides will be available for all the speakers. So thank you all. It was really great to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Kodaverdian. That was very insightful. Next up, we're going to hear from Melissa James with REACH. But first, we have a very aptly timed sponsor video from PG&E. Let's hear from PG&E.
Hello, I'm Maureen Zawalik, Vice President at Diablo Canyon Power Plant. For nearly 4 decades, Diablo Canyon Power Plant has been the backbone of California's clean energy ambitions. As the state's largest source of clean energy, we generate roughly 9% of California's electricity, enough to meet the energy needs of more than 3 million people. 2 years ago, the governor directed PG&E to seek extended operations of Diablo Canyon through 2030. This move not only ensures California can keep the lights on without backsliding on its climate goals, it will also save customers $600 million per year on average, or more than $3 billion over the duration of the extended operations period. We're proud to be operating right here on the Central Coast and excited about the economic benefits PG&E will continue to contribute to our communities. Thank you, SLO County, for your continued support as we safely deliver clean, reliable, and affordable energy.
Thank you, PG&E. All right, folks, perhaps this woman needs no introduction to this room. Melissa James has been the president and CEO of REACH since it was founded as the Hourglass Project in 2019. Under her leadership, this organization has grown from a one-woman show to 13 professionals, a team of 13 professionals that are now covering both San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties. She is a former Cal Poly grad. She was a Capitol director. The Tribune thinks she was top 20 under 40. It's under protest, as I understand it. but she was also named as top women in business and most influential in the region by the Pacific Coast Business Times. Ladies and gentlemen, a true influencer in our midst, Melissa James. Thank you, Melissa. I had to just say it 3 times, kind of like Beetlejuice. I don't know about you, I feel inspired, I feel influenced. I definitely agree with the Pacific Coast Business Times. Thank you so much. Wow. Well, in just a few minutes, you get to experience the Cal Poly Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. You've heard a lot about it. You get to experience it today. But first, we're going to have a video from Cal Poly.
Hello, I'm Jeff Armstrong, president of Cal Poly. The Central Coast Economic Forecast is something I look forward to each fall. It's a chance to look up from our individual concerns and think about how the region as a whole fits together. It's also an opportunity to ask ourselves how we can make our regional economy and the Central Coast even better. We believe in being good stewards of place. To us, that means taking responsibility for the place where we live and for our place within that community. This year, we're thrilled to welcome more than 800 local high school students as new Cal Poly arrivals. And we are equally thrilled to begin our 2+2 programs with Allen Hancock College starting this fall and with Cuesta College starting next fall. These programs help provide a flexible and accessible pathway to a Cal Poly degree for people in our community by providing students the opportunity to finish their 4-year degrees on the community college campuses. This is just a start, and we will continue to explore additional opportunities to partner with our local community colleges. Thank you for partnering with us and the Central Coast Economic Forecast to provide the information and insight to keep the regional economy getting better and better. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Cal Poly. All right, folks, buckle up. One of my favorite segments of the Central Coast Economic Forecast. It's 3 minutes to win it. If you haven't experienced this before, it's a lot like Shark Tank. So I want you to channel your inner Shark Tank right now. Kind of get in that shark mindset. We are going to hear from 3 homegrown businesses right out of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. You get to vote on which of them takes home $5,000 today. Real cash money. It's very exciting. To tell us more about the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, I'm going to invite Karen Tillman up to the stage. Karen, you might know her as the Economic Development Advisor to President Armstrong, but she is also the interim Executive Director of CIE. She came to Cal Poly about 1.5 years ago, but has 25 years experience working for large tech companies such as GoDaddy, Oracle, Cisco, Brex. Just brings a wealth of experience in that economic development space to our community. She's dedicated to shaping this community for innovation and economic development. It's a beautiful thing. Karen Tillman.
I don't think Ryan's ever said that many nice things about me, nor do I ever expect it again, but thank you, Ryan. Hi, everyone. Real privilege to be here, and I just wanted to say thank you, Melissa, for going ahead of me, because I think one thing you do so beautifully is not only talk about the opportunity that we have in our region, but really the optimism. And when I think about optimism, I really do think about entrepreneurship and how we continue to build our community to really support a vibrant and resilient entrepreneurship system. So it's been an honor for the last several months to be able to step in and help out with the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, because I do believe it's a really core component of what economic development can be in San Luis Obispo, what innovation can be in San Luis Obispo. And I'm really excited for you to hear from three of, I will say, my favorite teams that are working within our incubator right now. But before I get to them, I wanted to just give you a very quick overview of what the CIE is. Sometimes we hear about the CIE, but we don't really know what you do. So a really quick flyover just so everyone understands what we do and where we are. We're a really big component of Cal Poly's overall economic development mission. And we have a pretty simple but really ambitious goal. And that is, how do we create a vibrant, thriving entrepreneurship system in the Central Coast to really ensure that we have a wide range of industry, a wide range of thinkers, and a wide range of vibrancy to really continue to make San Luis the place that we all love. There's two components to what we do at the CIE. The first is what we do from the student programming side. So we run several different kinds of programs on campus, from an early stage incubator, different pitch competitions, startup weekends, but really sort of the big event that we have at the end of each year is our 12-week incubator program that runs over the summer, called the Summer Accelerator. And I was able to be part of the Summer Accelerator this year for the first time, and I have to say it was probably the most fun I've had, sitting downtown with all of these students who are really trying to make a go of their business. And entrepreneurship is messy, right? Like, it is not an easy process. And to really sit and think and counsel and engage and watch what these students went through was a really spectacular experience. All three of our founders actually were part of the Summer Accelerator in 2023. Well, I missed a number off there real big. Numbers aren't always my jam, but I'm going to give more of them a shot right now. Over the last decade of the Summer Accelerator, we've had 105 teams go through the program, and 33% of them have had an active out, which is either they're still active or they've had a successful acquisitions. 33% is a phenomenal number, especially when you consider that our students are amazing, but they are still usually in their early 20s. And so it's a pretty successful cohort to look at and say, I think we're onto something here. The other part I want to talk about is what we do from a community side. So as passionate as we are about our students, we also look at how do we provide benefit to the local community. And Melissa mentioned that we have the Hot House downtown. There's some programs that we run out of there, and I'm going to talk about two very briefly. First is our Small Business Development Center. The SBDC is really where we get to engage with a large number of clients in all of SLO County to really help them grow their business. So far this year, we've already counseled something like 443 different businesses, yikes, 2,500 hours of consulting, and we've helped them secure over $7 million in funding. And this is money coming into the region to help them grow their business, hire, market. So we feel really proud about the impact that we're able to make in that regards. The thing I want to touch on just very quickly before I hand it over to these guys is the incubator program. So each of our participants today are currently in our incubator program. It's a 2-year program that we run out of the Hot House. It's usually about 16 teams, and I went back and looked at some of the data as to how these teams have performed since they've been through the program. So we've had 79 companies through the program with a 51% success rate. That means either still active or a successful acquisition. These are phenomenal numbers, and I think we all know that while we have a good entrepreneurship system here, we don't have the strongest entrepreneurship system here as we see in other regions in California, but in spite of that, we are creating some really fantastic companies, ideas, and vibrancy that is so important to the economic resiliency of our region. And before we turn to the pitches, Melissa gave you a little bit of a preview of what we're doing at 1144 Churro Street. So we have our current building right now downtown is above the Ross on Higuera Street. But we see so much potential in the program and such a huge opportunity to continue to engage with our community that we're actually expanding our downtown presence. We're moving into the old Copeland Sports Building, which some of you probably remember, which has been vacant for 15 years. And later this year or early next, we're going to begin a pretty significant renovation process with hopefully moving in sometime that year. But what I want to say and leave you with about this building is that yes, Cal Poly is driving this effort, but the way that we see this is really a community asset. We want this building to be a hub for all of us, a hub for innovation, a hub for entrepreneurship, a hub for economic development, and a place we can all come together and really say, how do we want to continue to build this innovation and entrepreneurship climate in San Luis Obispo. So lots more to come on that as we go forward, but we're really excited about the possibility there. And I want to thank the city and the county in particular for their partnership in helping with this project, as well as our community partners that are just so in it with us as we try to figure out what the next phase is. So with that, I am going to roll video and you will be able to meet our entrepreneurs.
Today, it's a battle of big ideas as 3 local startups compete for a $5,000 cash prize. Welcome to 3 Minutes to Win It, showcasing 3 of the Central Coast's best and brightest. See their passion, hear their business plans, and be ready to choose your favorite in a vote by text poll. Now, let's meet our contenders. Samantha Moberly, founder of Social Spark, is striving to combat our country's loneliness epidemic by helping people form meaningful friendships through in-person socials. Shaun Tanaka, a service member in the U.S. Air Force, founded Castlelock Corporation with a mission to save lives by reinventing firearm safety. And finally, McCall Brinskele founded Mense, a period care company aspiring to change the way we talk about menstruation and transform the future of period care. So get ready, the competition starts now.
In Gen Z, this is what our social lives look like. Now, this is what they feel like. While we are supposedly the most connected generation, we are also the most lonely. Hi, I'm Sam, CEO and founder of Social Spark. The US is in a loneliness epidemic. 1 in 3 Americans report feeling lonely at least once a week, and 1 in 10 every single day. Though the rates are highest amongst young adults, this is not a generational issue. It's a human issue. Genuine connection is a basic need, and our society is starving for it. This is why Social Spark exists, to help create and enable lasting, powerful friendships. We currently match young adults across California together in small groups of 5 to 10 for mini socials. Each month, our members are sent invites to dinners, drinks, or other in-person activities that match their preferences. All they have to do is show up, look for the others wearing their bright orange Social Spark bracelets, and engage. Though we utilize technology for the matching and coordination, almost all of the interactions are in person, and the emphasis is really on face-to-face, old-fashioned connecting. Our freemium model has allowed for quick and widespread adoption, while our premium members pay $20 a month for more socials and more preferences. Just last month, we launched across all of California, and we're already seeing the spark catch. We currently have 3,000 members, with 7% paying for premium, and about 200 of these people are local young adults in SLO County. Last month alone, we had 130 socials in 70 different locations, and 90% of attendees plan to reconnect with someone they met before. And we've done all of this with a small team and small budget. We're excited to see what we can do as we continue to grow, considering this is a massive market. Right now, we're focused on 21 to 29-year-olds in California, and from there are going to expand into additional states and eventually more age groups, such as 30s, 40s, seniors, etc. Now, we're not the only players in this space. We've been able to craft our unique approach by learning from our customers and the challenges they face with existing platforms and socializing in general, which often comes down to quality of interactions, price, and time restrictions. One of our main competitors, Meetup, relies on the individual to pay to host their own group and events, which can often lead to infrequent or inconsistent experiences. Bumble BFF takes a dating app-like approach where you have to swipe on profiles and ultimately try to set up an awkward first date to make a friend. And then Time Left, while a step in the right direction, is limited to major cities and a single night of the week when they host dinners. In contrast, Social Spark fits into your life, matching your schedule, fitting into your local community and your budget, allowing for authentic connections on your own terms. All of this has been made possible with our awesome team, many of whom are here today. Shout out table 56 and 59. And they would all love to connect with you afterward. Again, I'm Sam, CEO and Social Spark's exclusive angel investor. I'm currently funding the startup by working as a full-time mechanical engineer. So if you're interested in becoming really good friends with the team and me, we are raising our first outside capital early next year and would love to have you join the Spark. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shaun Tanaka, and I'm the founder and CEO of Castlelock Corporation, where we are saving lives by reinventing firearm safety in the United States. I grew up in a household exposed to firearms. I personally have a background in the military, and I'm a gun owner. But in my sophomore year of college, I received a phone call that would forever change my life. My father, he called to tell me that I lost a childhood friend to a firearm. There are actually more firearms in the United States than there are people. And of those firearms, more than half are currently not stored securely because the current safety solutions are just not good enough for gun owners. And so as a result, for the third year in a row, firearms have become the leading cause of death for children in the United States. This isn't just a number or a statistic. One of those people was my friend, and it could have been prevented. I made it my life's mission to solve this problem, and I think that the solution to this problem lies somewhere in the middle ground, somewhere we can all agree on, which is safety. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the solution. Introducing Castlelock. For the responsible gun owner, we have invented the fastest from fully secure to ready-to-fire safety device in the world for AR-15s. We've created a biometric solution for gun owners by gun owners. And we're not just going to stop with the AR-15. We have an entire product line with people constantly asking us to make one for other rifles, shotguns, and pistols. So we're doing just that. With our biometrics being able to cover up to 200 fingerprints, it makes it perfect for law enforcement agencies, government agencies, and also military departments. In just 1 year of launch, we actually have over 1,000 pre-sales on our Castlelock devices. So we have our demand just eagerly awaiting our supply. Our company was born and raised here in the heart of San Luis Obispo. We were founded on a mission to save lives. These are the people that go to work every day knowing that the work they do today will save a life tomorrow. I just want to take a moment to say thank you to the Central Coast Economic Forecast for giving me the opportunity to be here today. And I just want to thank you and the audience and the community for joining me in saving lives by reinventing firearm safety in the United States. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is McCall Brinskele, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mense. Now, the reason that I am here today is because at the same time that I was first learning about the disparities in the women's health space, my sister was diagnosed with endometriosis and uterine fibroids after having suffered from painful periods for 8 years. And she's not alone. There are currently 1.8 billion people who menstruate. 90% of us feel uncomfortable simply having a period. And 79% of the people that we personally interviewed reported bleeding through onto their clothing and bed sheets on a regular basis. These are the two most popular options currently available on the market, pads and tampons. These are the same options that have been available to us since the 1930s. Although pads are the safer of the two options, many menstruators complain that they bleed through them on a regular basis, and they leave them with an uncomfortable wet diaper feeling. For these reasons, many menstruators will choose to wear tampons despite the fact that it is not recommended that you wear them longer than 4 to 6 hours, as they put you at a much higher risk for developing toxic shock syndrome. And both of these products have been found to contain harmful endocrine-disrupting chemicals that put menstruators at risk for endometriosis, uterine fibroids, and even cervical and ovarian cancer. After doing some preliminary research, I quickly realized there had to be a better solution that didn't put our health at risk. And there is. Menstrual cups are a product that has been gaining popularity since the 2000s. Because they are typically made out of a medical-grade silicone, they can be worn inside the body for up to 12 hours. They hold 3 times more than tampons, and they are reusable for years. There's just a few downsides with these current products. They can be quite difficult to figure out how to properly insert as well as how to remove. Here are just some quotes from current users saying, "I couldn't get it to sit properly and then almost couldn't get it out. And I get flashbacks of trying and nearly failing to get the damn thing out of me," and you can read the rest. I hope that it's clear that what menstruators want is not only a safe product, but one that is easy to insert as well as to remove. That's why Mense has developed the first menstrual cup and applicator that's as easy to insert and remove as a tampon. With our product, users can perfectly insert their menstrual cup on the first try, as well as remove it without giving themselves carpal tunnel. I am humbled to be accompanied by a team with an array of expertise ranging from women's health and silicone injection molding to marketing and menstrual cup development. And as for me, with a background in biomedical engineering, engineering management, and expertise in the menstrual health space, after having worked with over 500 menstruators the past 3 years, I understand this problem quite well from a technological perspective. I invite you to partner with us as we move to make the mission of Mense a reality. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. I was ready to go, no mic. I was prepared. Wow, you guys, all 3 of you deserve all the success in the world, but sadly, only one of you gets to take home $5,000 today, and you guys get to decide. You're in that awkward position where you get to make someone very happy and 2 other people very sad. So, how do you feel about that? Okay, so this is like event suicide, but I'm gonna ask you, take out your phones, try not to look at Instagram or the text messages accumulating. It is your opportunity to vote for which one of these businesses will take home the $5,000 grand prize. All right, so in your program, it will actually tell you who is associated with which number. So you are going to send a text message to the phone number 562-319-2902, right there in this green bar. Okay, that's the number you're going to send the text message to. And then what are you going to put in the text message? You're just going to put one number, either 1, 2, or 3. 1 for Social Spark, 2 for Castlelock, or 3 for Mense. We good? We clear? Everyone voting? Wonderful. I'm so excited to see who you choose. We're going to roll a video from another one of our sponsors, Amazon, while we tally the votes.
Hi, I'm Mary Witkowski, a Principal Product Manager at Amazon SLO. My family has been in SLO County for 5 generations, but after graduating from SLO High, I left to serve in the military. It was a job here at Amazon SLO that allowed me to move home to the Central Coast. In addition to helping people like me return home, Amazon helps locals stay local through programs such as our Junior Developer Program, which partners with Cal Poly to employ more students each year, offering local full-time positions to many after they graduate. Amazon has been in San Luis for more than 18 years and has 3 downtown offices employing over 150 talented Amazonians. Our local teams help authors self-publish Kindle books through Kindle Direct Publishing, help packages get to your door by delivering software that supports our retail delivery teams, and help businesses scale through Amazon Web Services. We are proud to sponsor the Central Coast Economic Forecast to bring together business and community leaders and provide actionable data and analysis to this region. I hope you enjoy the event, and now back to the forecast.
All right, thank you, Amazon. All right, so we're going to tally your votes. We're going to announce the winner in a little bit. But without further ado, folks, I'm excited to invite Dr. Chris Thornberg to the stage. He, like Melissa, needs no introduction to this crowd. We bring him back each year, not because of his love for the Dodgers, Well done. Well done. I had a whole list of things I was going to
No,
say
no,
about you.
you don't have to say anything.
I do want to publicly thank Chris for accepting payment in wine this year. It helps us out, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, something I can party with after the big win. Thank you. Oh, it is so. Good morning, San Luis Obispo. It is amazing to be back. I cannot believe the size of the crowd. I hear it's a record crowd this morning. So many good presentations already, and I loved, of course, the winner to what is it again? To 3 minutes to win it, right? So, but of course, I'm here to talk about the big picture today. What's going on in the U.S. economy? What's going on in California economy? And what's going to happen, of course, with this election as we head into 2025. Now, I've been here a lot of years, so you kind of know some of my shtick as the case may be. But let's kind of go back to the big picture of what we're going to talk about today. There's two things that are on the agenda. First thing we got to talk about, of course, is what we think is happening in our economy today. What you want to call our social narrative, or perhaps you might call it our lived experience, right? Now, the other thing we have to talk about is what's actually happening in our economy today, our objective statistical reality. And I appreciate that these two things are supposed to be the same. That's what I was taught when I did my grad degree all those many years ago. I was taught about homo economist, that rational agent at the bottom of all these models. But of course, I got out in the real world and I looked at all these people and I went, rational? Really? Does that make a logical assumption? Is that a logical assumption? And you know, what's happened to me over the last really decade is you lean in more and more in this and you start to recognize that there is a difference. And the difference is incredibly important because ultimately, if you want to know where the economy is going, you have to pay attention to both the narrative and the objective reality. Narratives drive choices. They drive the choices of households. They drive the choices of businesses. It drives, of course, the choices of our policymakers. But it's economic reality that determines the outcome of those particular choices. So if you really want to know what's going to happen, you have to be paying attention to both of these particular forces and appreciate that they aren't necessarily aligned. And the way to sum it up is that good choices and policies start with the correct narrative. You have the wrong narrative, you get the wrong policy. Right narrative, right policy. Any effort to promote economic development is really about promoting the right narrative. Over and over and over, I'm going to hit on that point over the course of today's presentation. And if you want to see, of course, the gap between the narrative and reality, well, let's just talk about what we've been talking about at the national level over the course of the last couple of years. In fact, it was a couple of years ago, back in 2022 when I joined you, when we were all told about the recession that was going to be collapsing onto the U.S. economy in every particular moment in time. And we sat around in 2023 on pins and needles waiting for the next calamity to befall our economy. What happened? Well, absolutely nothing. 2023 was a hell of a year, right? Turned out great. And by the end of the year, we saw inflation cooling off. We heard about multiple rate Fed cuts. The stock market started jumping again. We got into 2024, and in April of this year, the Wall Street Journal proudly said, we're now the envy of the world. How's that for a turnaround? In 18 months, a recession is imminent to envy of the world. You got to love that. Just 2 months later, we saw a little uptick in the unemployment rate, and the next thing you know, there's a 40% chance we're already in a recession. Whoa, whiplash, right? Now, of course, over and over and over, it feels like the people of the forecasting community are trying to prove John Kenneth Galbraith's famous quote that the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. Now, I have had the opportunity to come, I think this is my 16th year or something like that. Wow, right? And, for the most part, I think I've been pretty on. And last year when I was with you, I kind of poo-pooed the whole thing about the recession. We contribute to the Wall Street Journal survey of forecaster. One question is, what is your probability of a recession in the next 12 months? The average was above 60%. You could see us there along the bottom. There was one quarter I put in 20%. I swear to God, it was peer pressure. I'm like, wow, everybody else is freaking out. What am I missing? It's got to be something, right? Of course, by the next quarter, I'm like, no, I'm not missing anything. It's just fine. Now, with that being said, here's the big picture. I'm still not worried. The economy is still fine, and it's fine for one specific reason. The economy's fine because the American consumer is fine. Consumer spending is almost 70% of GDP. If the consumer is alive and well, the U.S. economy will grow with it, no matter what. It's just as simple as that. The consumer pulls the economy forward. All the other issues out there fall to one side. And the consumer remains incredibly strong. Demand is still very, very good. And better news, the Federal Reserve is backing off, kinda. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. And we're seeing a little better labor force growth. All good news. Now, with all that being said, does that mean everything's fine? I can just wrap up my presentation here and go celebrate the Dodgers? Well, no, not quite yet. We do have a couple more issues we have to be worried about. First of all, one of the things that's good about our economy today is consumer spending. But what's driving consumer spending, therein lies the issue. What's driving all this wonderful consumer spending? Well, it's the fact that asset prices are clearly too high at this point in time. We have the third highest PE ratio in our stock markets that this nation's ever seen. The last two, by the way, were back in 2000 and, of course, 2021. Not exactly good comparisons. And we have this enormous federal budget deficit, and we have growing external deficits. None of this is sustainable. At some point, it has to break. When is that going to occur? Don't know. Couldn't tell you. It all has to do with narratives, and that is one of the hardest things to predict. But therein, of course, yet again, I come back around to my central point here. The real problem in our economy is that our narratives are wrong, right? Think about the narratives of our U.S. economy today, and everything is bad, everything is suffering, when in reality, the economy looks like it's kind of overheating. And again, we're never going to get to the right policy until we start with the right narrative, and the narratives are wrong, and it's driving bad policy and even uglier politics. And boy, if this election doesn't reflect that ugly politics, I don't know what does. Now, diving into the basic data, again, the economy's been growing great. For the last 2 years, this nation has averaged 2.8% in real growth per quarter for 2 years running. That's a really good run. Good spending from consumers. Business investment's been picking up. Exports are doing better. Things are fine. We just got the third quarter number. Another 2.8% growth, yet again led by good, strong numbers with consumer spending. And consumers continue to have fun. I mean, the numbers are off the charts. Global travel, all-time high level. Las Vegas, you can't get a cup of coffee. It's too busy, right? Restaurant spending. Restaurant spending is up 45% right now from where it was prior to the pandemic. 45% increase in restaurant spending in 5 years. The previous 5 years, it was just 15%. You want to be jealous of somebody's 10K? Live Nation. They don't put on any concerts without every single ticket selling out, including every single VIP package. These guys are printing money right now, right? Even when you think about the financial situation Americans are in right now, you'll hear a little bit of bad news about credit card delinquencies and whatnot. But you know what? Overall debt servicing as a share of disposable income, well, for mortgage debt, it's still rock bottom despite all the conversations about housing unaffordability, and for the rest of debt at a normal level. The best sort of metric for high-level household distress, bankruptcies and foreclosures, right? Those are the two worst things that can befall a family. And by the way, bankruptcies and foreclosures are still at record low levels right now, half the rate that we were in 2019 when they were a record low level then. This is not a struggling American public. This is an American public that's doing just fine. What about that little bit of an increase in the unemployment rate? Well, yes, it did drift up, and that is kind of unusual. We typically don't see unemployment rates drifting up unless the economy is cooling off dramatically, typically tipping into a recession. Well, part of this, of course, has a lot to do with the fact that the economy has cooled off a bit from that white-hot level we were at a couple years ago to something more reasonable now. But with that being said, the rest of the labor market actually looks really strong. Put the little increase in the unemployment rate to one side. Initial claims for unemployment insurance, still basically at rock bottom levels. The share of people being laid off or fired, below rock bottom levels. So whatever's happening in our labor market, it doesn't have anything to do with people losing their jobs. People are fine. And while the labor market has cooled off a bit, the balance of power is still firmly on the side of the worker. We still have 1.25 job openings for every single person looking for a job in the United States right now. And when there's so many job openings, well, people have options, businesses have to compete, and that, of course, pushes wages up. On the right-hand side, I'm showing you real hourly wage growth. Real, that's inflation adjusted. And the average is a little less than 4%. The median's a little above 2%. Americans' incomes are growing faster than prices, despite hearing the opposite over and over and over again in what seems to be every single major newspaper. Even in the concept of inequality, right? Because the typical reaction is, well, that's great for the top 10%, but everybody else is suffering, right? And this is a standard narrative, the baffling academic feud over income inequality. I love the first line. Everyone knows that inequality has gotten out of hand. Everybody knows that, well, except for the data, right? And it turns out that over the last decade, yes, the lowest quartile of earners have seen more wage growth than the top quartiles. In fact, over the last decade, the lowest quartile has seen 58% increase in their earnings compared to 40% for the highest quartile. Now, don't get me wrong. First of all, I'm not worried about your standard thoracic surgeon. They're going to be fine, thank you very much. And I will also say that our mission of helping those less fortunate will never end. Seriously, it will never end. So never think we're ever going to get to that place. But we can take a step back and breathe, because guess what? The trends are moving in the right direction. We do not need to be in a panic. Things are moving in the right direction, and more often than not, that's often forgotten. How about here in the state of California? Again, such interesting narratives, particularly in an election year. How is California doing? Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask Republicans across the nation right now, they'll tell you California is a failing state. That's right. Businesses are fleeing. Rich people are fleeing. This state is failing, and it's failing because of its socialist policies that are driving economic activity right out of the state. Now, if you talk to the left, guess what? They will also tell you we're a failing state. But we're a state that's failing our people. Screaming inequality. People can't afford their rent. Rising homelessness. So which is it? Are we a socialist disaster, or are we a capitalist disaster? Can someone help me figure this out? I don't think we can be both, can we? Now, we do have a third opinion on this. It's the governor, and the governor will be like, hey, it's the 5th largest economy in the world. We're doing fine. And no, I'm not running for president yet. Now, if I had to agree with somebody here, who would I agree with? The governor. He's absolutely right. The economy is fine. Now, I appreciate we're not growing as fast as Arizona. We're not growing as fast as Texas. And we certainly have seen some issues in key sectors like information and financial activities and manufacturing. But with all that being said, that's not the only metrics to think about. How about the fact that unemployment insurance here hasn't risen just like the rest of the United States? People aren't getting laid off. Business applications are up. Job openings are still relatively hot. Did you know economic output in the state of California is growing faster than the nation overall? So yes, less job growth, but more output growth, which is, kind of an interesting aspect of things. You kind of need to pay attention to both of those. And, of course, not just output, but incomes. Prior to the pandemic, your average Californian per capita income was about 16% more than the national average. Today, it's over 20% more. So yes, incomes in the state of California have been rising faster than for the nation. We seem to be doing all right. Even when it comes to state inequality, California's poverty rate is still at the lowest level, close to the lowest level we've ever seen. And yet again, talking about some distributional aspects, take a look on the right-hand side and take a look at the biggest increases in income over the course of the last 4 years. Well, it's for Hispanic and African-American households. So yes, even racial inequality is falling in the state of California right now. This is pretty good data. It's really good news, but it's nothing we hear about ever in the papers or coming out of our folks in Sacramento. This is what we hear. Nearly a third of Californians are living in or near poverty. Now that came out of a research group out of the Bay Area. And I called them up and I went, wait a minute, the official poverty rates say they're at an all-time low level. How come you could say this? Why is it a third? And they're like, well, yeah, we know it's higher than the official number. Well, why? Well, we raised the poverty level. What? You just raised it? Yeah. You could do that? Okay. Okay, but we'll work with you. We'll work with you. What if you use that new higher level and go back in time? Well, what then? Well, we're at the lowest level ever. Okay. Well, why didn't your headline say that? Well, because this gets people attention better, right? And that's the key. What you're hearing, the narratives, the stories, they're not what the data is telling us over and over and over again. Look, industrial production's moving along, business investment's doing well, particularly places like, for example, single-family investments up, and manufacturing structures are up. If you're wondering about manufacturing, by the way, it's all these chip plants we're building all over the place right now because of our chip shortage a couple of years ago. Pretty soon we're going to be up to our armpits in chips, as the case may be, which is good news, I guess. But even on the housing market, look, if you're a real estate agent, you are not having a good year. August was one of the weakest months for sales our real estate markets have ever seen. Weakest ever. And of course, we have the big uproar over the changes in commission structures. It's not a good time to be in that particular space. But with all that being said, did you notice that home prices are going up? They're not falling, they're going up. And of course, overall vacancy rates are very, very low right now. The real story of housing is not a lack of sales, but a lack of supply. Inventories, vacancy rates are at an all-time high level, which is exactly why people continue to buy homes and why housing permits still look pretty good. In fact, our single-family permits are basically right now above where they were at any point in time from 2009 to 2019. So again, I get it. At one level, the market looks pretty weak, but in many other ways, it looks strong. It all depends on how you look at it. And of course, better news, inflation has cooled off. It's now running about 2.5% year over year. Stock market's at an all-time high level. Of course, interest rates have started to drop, in part because we had that wonderful decrease in the federal funds rate just a couple months ago, and it looks like the Federal Reserve is lining up for yet another one. So again, pretty good news. I mean, hell, even Bitcoin is back. Have you seen this? Seriously. $63,422.80 the other day. We've done some work on this. I have a little bit of a model that we put together to help people better navigate this space. And my model suggests that Bitcoin's overvalued maybe roughly $63,422.80, give or take, right? Now, if you're wondering about where my research came from, it came from I read a wonderful book over the course of this last summer. It's a biography of a wonderful Italian-American gentleman. It's a rags to riches to jail to deportation story of a true American entrepreneur. I suggest you pick it up. It's a wonderful read. It'll tell you everything you need to know about crypto, right? But with all that good news, what's the mood? Well, according to the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, it started to bounce back, but now it's tailing off again, and the index is roughly where we were in 2011 and 12. Gallup has a U.S. satisfaction, and it's a very similar sort of picture. We're nowhere near as satisfied as we were in 2019, roughly where we were in 2012. More Americans say they are living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, wow. I mean, mind you, my wife views that as a challenge, but we typically think of it as bad news. But with that being said, you can see what I'm saying. Even this, right? This came out of the Washington Post, in opinion. The economy is on the line. Which candidate do we trust to save it? I love this. Save it. Which candidate's going to save the economy? Does our economy really need saving? Not really. But again, this is the rhetoric. This is what we hear. The social narrative is highly off base from our economic reality. And this is the human condition. You see it all the time. Look, snark aside, why should Bitcoin not have positive value? It's very simple. Any kid with a master's degree in computer science coming out of Cal Poly SLO can go ahead and invent their own cryptocurrency. And if any kid with a master's degree can make another cryptocurrency, how can any cryptocurrency be worth anything? Anything with infinite supply cannot have a positive price. That's logic. But it doesn't seem to work, does it? Because if I wanted a Bitcoin to, hang on my wall in my office, if you can do that, I'm not really up on this stuff, I'd have to pay $63,000 for it. Well, what's going on? Well, it's the power of the narrative. And what narrative? Oh, it's easy. Go look at the websites and watch the videos. Oh, they have this fog banks full of logic, and all boils down to beating the man and getting around the system and taking charge. And no matter how thin you slice it, it's total baloney. But when you have a lot of baloney out there, real value starts to emerge. And by the way, there's no snark there. I wish I had invented it. I wouldn't have to work anymore. What a cool trick. Now, mind you, again, it can't last, right? Or can it? Because there's another product just like this. Anybody here invest in gold? Right? Seriously. Hey, look, if you look at any market metrics, you look at the true industrial and consumer value of gold, you go, well, it's nowhere near the price that you have to pay for it. What's going on? Well, it's because piles of banks just take bars of the stuff and they leave it sitting in the basement for no particular reason. And of course, plenty of investors buy little pieces of it and leave it sitting in their lockbox for no particular reason, right? Well, they have their reasons, right? What do they tell you? Well, you know, gold is an inflation hedge. Oh, well, what does that mean? Well, you know, when prices go up, the price of gold goes up. Yeah, when prices go up, the price of everything goes up. What makes gold special, right? Oh, well, 100 years ago, we used it as a basis of our currency systems globally. Yeah, and 100 years ago, we rode horses to work and we beat our kids weekly. What's your point? I don't understand where you're going here, right? But it doesn't matter. The narrative sticks. And as a result of that, gold is still overpriced. Now, by the way, the other side of it, realities that don't have a narrative attached, the federal deficit. The federal deficit, 6.2% of GDP this last year. Our overall debt is 110%. We have enormous obligations for Medicare and Social Security. This is a growing crisis, which is exactly why in the presidential debate, they spent exactly 0 minutes discussing it. Now, what is going on? Now, again, don't point fingers at politicians. Politicians, by definition, are slaves to the narrative. You are elected or you are not elected on the basis of which narrative you grab. Simple as that. You are a slave to the narrative, right? And the reality is both candidates have all sorts of folks who go out and work with focus groups, and all their experts have told them people don't care about it, so don't talk about it. If they're not talking about it, it's because we've shown that we don't care about it. Again, that is not sustainable. At some point in time, it's going to rain on that parade. And what does it look like? It depends on the narrative. Now, when you start thinking of the world this way, it makes a lot of sense. You can see it skewing our interpretation of news, at the root of economic bubbles, driving bad policy choices. I mean, Schiller wrote a book called Narrative Economics. He won the Nobel Prize, right? And he says we need to incorporate the contagion of narratives in economic theory, otherwise we remain blind to a very real mechanism for economic change. Hear, hear, absolutely right. But don't kid yourself. You know, this is the human condition, and we've known that. Our philosophers have known. My favorite California philosopher is a guy named Will Rogers, who over 100 years ago said, it isn't what we don't know that gives us trouble, it's what we know that ain't so. That's a broken narrative. And he talked about it 100 years ago. And we just keep relearning the same wisdom over and over again, don't we? Right? Simple as that. Now, of course, the new American narrative, what I've been talking to you about for decades, is a narrative of miserableism. No matter how good it is, there's someone out there who's going to explain to you how bad it is, right? And we saw that really start to take hold. You saw it start to warp policy in a very large way when the pandemic hit. Because there's no doubt the pandemic was a tragic circumstance. We were stuck inside. Millions of people passed. It was a scary, lonely time. But with all that said, pandemics don't cause depressions. Never have, never will. It's as simple as that. Go 100 years ago, look at the Spanish flu, which, by the way, was a hell of a lot worse than COVID. Didn't cause a depression. What are you talking about? Well, they were just feeding the narrative. That's what you do to get in the headlines. You feed the narrative. They fed the narrative, and let's watch the hijinks ensue. And wow, were there some hijinks. Now, I was out there, I was yelling, it's going to be a V. I was with you, I told you back then. But people don't really listen to me much. I don't know. I think it's economists in general, right? You listen to narratives. You don't listen to economists. But, of course, it was a V. The deepest recession in U.S. economic history, the shortest recession in U.S. economic history, 8 weeks long. By the third quarter, we were roaring back. By the first quarter of 21, the economy was fully healed. But don't let reality get in the way of a good narrative. Congress, the Federal Reserve, the various presidents had all determined that they were going to save the economy, even if the economy didn't need saving. And so they unleashed $6 trillion in stimulus against a $1.2 trillion hit to our economy. $5 of stimulus for every single dollar of lost income. By the way, that adds up to $50,000 for every single American household. Now, it wasn't, of course, just that $50,000. It's how that $50,000 torqued the rest of the economy, in particular the financial markets. $50,000 hit the economy, every single asset price went through the roof. Housing, the stock market, cryptocurrency, everything exploded, and that returned even more money back to American households. That $50,000 in initial cash ultimately turned into $350,000 in brand new net worth for every single American household. The numbers are off the charts. And it was everybody who was enjoying it at every income level, right? So obviously, cue the chaos. Everybody's rich, everybody's going to have fun, and that's what they did. And the numbers are clear on this. All you hear all the time is how people are struggling to pay for the basics. But look at what people are spending money on. Of the 32% increase in spending over that 4-year period, there was a 113% increase in spending on air transport, 70% on foreign travel, 62% on sporting equipment, 54% on recreational items. A different measure of restaurants, this one says 51%. As for necessities, utilities up 38%, housing 30%, pharmaceuticals 25%, food for home consumption 24%. We had a pile of money and we spent it on fun stuff, and you never heard that story, right? You just never heard that story. Now, the other thing, of course, that happened is when you have a 40% increase in the money supply and you throw in a whole bunch of consumer demand, well, guess what happens? Inflation. Not complicated. You want to know monetary theory in one sentence? It's very simple. When there are more dollars than there are goods, prices will go up, period. That is how inflation works. It is a demand phenomenon, right? But we don't hear it all the time. We don't hear of inflation as a demand phenomenon. We hear it as a big hit on Americans' bottom line. You've heard it. 85% of Americans feeling inflation in day-to-day lives. I think I showed this to you last year. I just love it so much. The second bullet, right? Big negative headline. Second bullet, 88% said inflation has impacted their spending at restaurants. What? I just showed you the number. There has been a 50% increase in spending at restaurants. What are you talking about, right? Well, I tell you what they're talking about. They're talking about their narrative. Surveys don't capture reality. Surveys capture narratives, and narratives are important. Again, you want to know where the economy is going, you got to pay attention to the narrative, and you got to pay attention to the data. The only problem is when you assume those two things are the same. They're not. And where you're getting here is people's narrative. They're annoyed by price increases. People's reaction to price increases is really way more than it should be. And there's a lot of psychology as to why that's the case, but that's the reality of it. And people are still thinking this. 70% of consumers feel inflation outpacing income. I just showed you the data. Incomes are outpacing inflation. And even something as what's to be, August state in a publication that leans in on the data and gives us reality, like The Economist. The Economist earlier this year asked the question, could the inflation nightmare soon be over? Well, what nightmare? That's going to take 7 months for my brand new BMW X6 to get delivered? That I can't get a reservation at my favorite restaurant in SLO? What nightmare are we talking about? But this is how it works, right? And if you want to know why does this go off like this? Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the course of the last few years of my life. And there's been some wonderful books. Great book. A guy named Daniel Kahneman wrote a book 15 years ago called Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman was basically a researcher in psychology who won the Nobel Prize in economics for his insanely powerful insights into how people think, how we make decisions, how we view the world. And what he really does is kind of poke through our hubris. Because we really think that we see the world, we are in control of how we interpret information. We have this hubris in us, right? but it's not like that. Like he points out there's really two ways of thinking. He calls it type 1 and type 2. And type 2 thinking, well, that's the you thinking. That's the modern digital thinking. It's the system that allows you to figure out incredibly complicated things, right? Like what's at the heart of the atom and how old's the universe and all this kind of crazy stuff. And it's an incredibly powerful system, there's no doubt about it. But it's not as powerful as we think it is. Look, our type 2 system is a relatively recent part of our brain. And that system, well, it's kind of a 286 chip in a Pentium world for the old people like me who understand what that means, right? And what he points out is that system 2, while it's in charge of doubting and unbelieving, it's sometimes busy and often lazy. You really can only think about one hard thing at a time. That's it. We're not multitaskers. You can think about one hard thing at a time. That's it. Now, who's running the show in the rest of the time then? Well, it's your type 1 system. And the type 1 system, that's the old-fashioned system, the analog system. And that's not new. That's been around for millions, hundreds of millions of years. That's been evolving. And it's quick, it's fast, it's instinctive, it's emotional. It's incredibly effective, right? We know that. But with this being said, because it's built for efficiency, it's got some problems with it. And when you think about efficiency, keep something in mind. What was the primary goal of the type 1 system? Very simple, is to keep your genetic ancestors from being eaten. That's what it's about. So, in other words, it's very, very good at making incredibly rapid decisions with very limited information, which can be good to not get eaten. But it also leaves us with all sorts of cognitive biases. And a cognitive bias is any way that we actually warp information as it comes into our brain. And we do so on a regular basis, and it's typically part of that shortcut system. What it does is these are the kind of systems that give us a little bit too much confidence in what we think we're thinking. Classic case of this, I think I showed this to you last year, are these horizontal lines. It's parallel. Type 2 says, of course, they're parallel. If they weren't parallel, he wouldn't ask the question. Your type 1 system says, no, they're not parallel. They don't look parallel to me. And that's understandable. This is an optical illusion. Here's the key. Your eyes, you remember, your eyes interpreting information, and it sees colors, it sees shapes. It also needs to see depth. Because ultimately, not getting eaten has a lot to do with where that tiger is, right? And so you have to make a quick decision about depth perception. Well, here's the key. It uses shadows to help understand depth. And those black lines, those black and white squares there, create a sense of depth that doesn't actually exist, which is why those lines don't look parallel to you, right? It's an understandable system. Now, if I threw some lines on there, you go, oh yeah, they're parallel. I get it now, right? If you highlight it, right? But again, your type 2 system has to be active for you to understand you're seeing an optical illusion. If type 2 is not there, you don't see it. And type 2, often busy, often lazy. We don't think as much as we think, okay? And by the way, if you're wondering, for those of you in the back of the room, this is a whole bunch of people going up the escalator into a 24-hour fitness. You see? Now, we saw this a couple years ago, right? We saw how this gets warped. Gas prices went up by 50%. Everybody was losing their mind. We were told that we had to choose between driving to work and feeding grandma that weekend, right? We were told it was a terrible tragedy caused by the invasion of Ukraine. But when you actually looked at the data, you know, for that 50% increase in gasoline prices, people only reduced their consumption of gasoline by 1.5%. That's not supply, that's demand. That is an American public who said, I don't care what the price of gas is. I've been stuck inside for a year, and God damn it, I'm going out, right? Simple as that. It was a demand effect. But how do we get the wrong idea? Well, what do? The news that walks up to this guy in the gas station, they put a camera in his face and go, hey man, how do you feel about filling up your tank? How do you feel down here, right? Well, I know how he feels. He's annoyed. He's annoyed. Of course he's annoyed. That's what happens, right? I came here to spend $100 to fill up my tank, and I spent $150. I'm annoyed. Now, that's what you get. This person's upset about it. Oh, it must be a terrible thing. He probably can't feed his grandma this weekend, right? But no, you don't know that. That's just called benchmarking. He could be a billionaire or impoverished. He would still be annoyed. That is a human reaction. It's called benchmarking. Simple, right? Now, mind you, if the reporter wanted to ask the right question, they wouldn't ask, how do you feel? Because we know the answer to that. They'd ask, where are you going? And if the answer is, I'm taking my brand new boat down to the lake to go fishing with my boys, you don't care about the price of gasoline now, do you? And that's the key, right? Now, the Fed had to get involved, right? And they cranked up the federal funds rate. They also engage in quantitative tightening. And yes, they've gotten a handle on inflation. And it's even looking at how the consumer has cycled through things. We had the pandemic implosion, and then we had that insane stimulus vaccine bounce. Then, of course, we had the inflation and Fed policy reset, and now we're back to normal. In 2024, we're back to normal. A few more services, a little less goods, as the case may be. But here's the critical issue. Put all that aside. I know there's been lots of fluctuations in what people are buying. Here's the important thing. They will continue to buy. And they will continue to buy because real household disposable income continues to grow and because overall U.S. household net worth has not fallen. For all the Fed action to get inflation out of the system, they have not purged the system of these enormous increases in asset prices. In fact, asset prices have started to accelerate again over the course of the last year and a half, and now Americans are $47 trillion up from where they were prior to the pandemic. So Americans are sitting on piles of cash, their incomes are going up, they will continue to spend, and the rest of the economy will come along with them. And even consumer debt, go back to the idea that we are starting to see increases in our overall credit card delinquencies. Yeah, I get that. That's real data. But is it systemic or is it systemic, in other words, the tip of the iceberg, or is it an anomaly? Well, I already showed you the data. It's actually an anomaly. Overall, households have great finance. And of course, even if you look at credit card debt as a share of disposable income, well, it's a little above 5%. Back in 2007, it was 8%. So we don't have a lot of credit card debt. We don't have a lot of overall debt. What's going on? Why are people having trouble paying their credit card bills? Well, I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day that kind of explained it. And apparently 12 million people claim to be full-time influencers. This could have something to do with it. Right? But that goes back to what I'm saying. What about Gen Z, right? We heard a little bit about Gen Z here, right? And by the way, that's a great, of course, example of what Gen Z can be. Very excited to see these young entrepreneurs and these great ideas they had. But with all that said, I don't know if you guys knew this, but your lives really suck. It's true. It's awful. I just read this the other day. I don't know if anybody knows this No Mercy, No Malice by Scott Galloway. Is an NYU blog post. And he told you, today's 25-year-olds, well, we broke our social contract with you guys. Hey, you make less than your parents. You make less than your grandparents. That's right. And you're carrying student debt loads unimaginable to any earlier generations. And housing costs, you will never buy a home. Any of you, be prepared to be renters for your entire life. Right? This is what he said, and I thought this guy's like an NYU professor. Well, okay, narrative or reality? Well, it turns out narrative, okay? First of all, incomes are going up, more so for women than men. Well, that's 2 out of 3, we see that, right? So their income going up. Look at real median net worth, particularly for 35 to 44-year-olds, which has never been higher than any previous generation. No, they're not actually suffering from too much debt and not enough income. They're actually doing great relative to any previous generation. So this isn't the truth. And of course, this doesn't even cover all the wonders of it, right? You're going to live longer, less infant mortality, less crime rate. Everybody in this room has one of these smartphones. These things have been around for 15 years, no, a little more than that, about 17 years now. 17 years. One of these in your pocket. Infinite access to entertainment and information and communication, right? When I was a kid, this is what a smartphone looked like, just to be clear, all right? All right? Or TV today, giant flat screen TV, costs you nothing at Costco. This is what a TV looked like when I was a kid, okay? 4 channels, and if you wanted to watch Doctor Who, you had to stay up to 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. And by the way, it was exactly that sleep deprivation that made you think Doctor Who was ever a good TV story in the first place. It was not. It was horrible. And now you can watch every single one back to back and prove that to yourself this weekend, okay? I mean, even I didn't have to fix cars when I was a kid. They blew up on impact. It made it real easy, right? Where you guys have these amazing sorry, hang on. You guys have these amazing vehicles available to you. Great gas mileage, right? Look wonderful. Got every bell and whistle in the world. I mean, hell, even dieting. Dieting used to be miserable, right? You suffer and suffer and suffer. Now you take a shot, lose 50 pounds. You guys, right? But with all that being said, actually, I want to go back to the first person who talked on your thing, because you know what? For all this, kids are miserable. They really are. I mean, look at the levels of self-harm and depression, right? Look at the overdoses. The data tells us that it is an unhappy generation. There's no doubt about it. Here's the key. Don't blame the economy. Don't blame the economy. It's the narrative that's broken. We tell kids their lives are terrible, and they start to believe it. I don't blame them. You hear it constantly. And if you don't hear it from the newspapers, you see it on the internet. Because every time you turn on your internet and you have Facebook, every one of your friends is having a lifetime experience. Now, it's not, of course. They're probably not actually in that location. Or if they are, it's because they racked up their credit card and they can't pay it off. Or they faked it by renting the limo and the Chanel bags. It's all a mirage. But you know what? It gets into your head, and you start to think it's true, and you really start to think that your life is terrible. My father was raised in abject poverty, right? He was. But with that being said, as my uncle said, we were happy. Why? We were poor as dirt, but everybody else around us was too. There was no internet. We didn't know any other way. This was life, and we were happy. Sometimes comparisons aren't good. Sometimes it's better to be in your space, because you can find the joy where it exists as opposed to pretending everybody else has it and your life sucks in comparison. Yeah. And by the way, any kids in your life, get this book, The Anxious Generation. Unbelievable book about how the internet is screwing with our kids. You read this, you will never allow your kid to have a smartphone, period. Not going to happen until they're like 17 years old, because you see the damage we're doing to our kids, right, by not paying attention to the narrative, and we need to. And you understand the psychology of this stuff. There's a whole other thing about this, all about the elephant and the rider, okay? And the idea of the elephant and the rider, and this is an old one, but think of it this way. Your rider is your type 2, and the elephant's your type 1. And we like to think that type 2 is in charge, right? Type 2 does everything, but it's not really anywhere near as much in charge as you would like to think. In fact, the elephant's way more in charge. It really is. And when the elephant's constantly hearing how terrible and tragic everything is, well, you start to feel that way. Even if rationally you know it isn't true, it gets into your head. But it gets even a little creepier when you look a little deeper into it. And you know, Jonathan Haidt, same guy who wrote that book, he also had this quote. He says, "The rider evolved to serve the elephant." And what does that mean? Well, you're going along, the rider goes, "We should go right." The elephant goes, "No, I'm going left." And guess what? You're going left. But this is the interesting thing. The rider just doesn't go, "Well, okay, we should go right, but we're going to go left." The rider will actually start to create post hoc justifications for what the elephant did. It doesn't just go, "Well, I guess the elephant's in charge." It makes excuses for the elephant. It starts to build an even more warped version of the universe to justify your emotions. Honestly, this is what we all suffer from. We all have to be cognizant of the fact that inside you is an elephant, and the elephant's in charge, and the elephant's a very emotional critter. And we have to pay attention to this. And the best way to see this, I got this wonderful graph from a Federal Reserve survey. Let me explain what it is. That very top line, they ask a whole bunch of people, how are you doing? Scale of 1 to 100. And back in 2017, the average number was 74. By the way, in 2023, it was 72. That's statistically the same. In other words, the average person thinks they're just as good as they were back in 2017. They're a little better off, but we'll give them that, okay? Now, with all that being said, what are those next two lines? Well, the next two lines are, well, how are people doing in your neighborhood? How is the average person doing in your neighborhood? And how is the average person doing in the rest of the country? And look how those are falling, right? So get this. So understand what this says. The average person says, I'm fine. But the average person thinks the average person is not fine. It doesn't work like that, okay? It's just like, look, 90% of parents think their kids are above average. Doesn't work that way. All right? Look, I got 2 kids. Statistically, one of them is going to be a dumbass. I know that. Not sure which one yet. Keeping an eye out. Could be both. Who knows? But that's the key, right? Everybody thinks things are bad when it's not, and that's the danger right there. And that goes back to the housing conversation. You want to see the narrative in action? Well, what about buying a house? Worst time ever. Well, of course people think that. Look at the headlines. No one can afford a house. I always love this. 99% of homes are unaffordable. Really? Do you know where we get home prices from? Where? From people buying homes. Oh, so someone can afford it. I know, because they're buying them. So again, nonsensical, but this is what you hear. Now here's the actual data. If you look at affordability, accounting for interest rates, it's a different picture than what you hear in the paper. Oh, it's not very good. It's bad compared to what it was in 2019. But here's the key. 2019, housing was record affordable. Let me repeat that. From 2009 to 2019, never had homes been cheaper in the United States. Why? How could? Okay, well, what's going on here? Why didn't people buy homes? I'll tell you why. Because we were running around telling them it was overpriced. Does anybody else remember in 2018 and 2019 how we were going to have a recession? Why? Because housing market's going to collapse. Why is it going to collapse? Because it's violently overvalued. This was a story. And what's amazing about the power of the story is how it confirmed itself, right? Oh, I heard housing's overvalued. Well, let's not buy a house now. And so the market got cold, proving to people that housing was overpriced. And in 2018, I had people walking up to me going, so when are home prices going to fall? Never. But the narrative stuck. Now, you want to see what happens. Think about why did this narrative suddenly implode? Well, go to mid-2020. And suddenly, in the middle of 2020, people had interest rates had absolutely collapsed. Everybody was stuck inside. You realize you really didn't like your family that much. I need more space. Home prices don't look like they're ever going to fall. So you know what? Forget about it. Let's go look at a house. And people put their mask on, and they walked down the road to that open house, and then they saw the line of 943 other people with masks on to see the same open house. And in seconds, the narrative went from, oh, housing's overpriced, they're going to fall in a second now, to I'm never going to be able to buy a house, ever, ever, ever. And wow, did that narrative collapse. It blew up. It was like a dam collapsing. And in 2 years, home prices went up by 50% in 2 years. So the narrative held everything back, and when that narrative blew up, it just came pouring out like nobody's business. Home prices went through the roof, and interest rates came up, and bam, housing is no longer affordable. But keep in mind that all had to do with the collapse of that false narrative, and that is an interesting social thing to pay attention to. Now again, the real issue today is nothing to buy. But that's why new home sales actually are doing pretty good, because there's nothing to buy. It's a supply situation more than anything else. The real long-run problem in the United States continues to be a lack of labor force. We've talked about this. We know that it's true in SLO, it's true in California, it's true in the nation. Our population of 25 to 54-year-olds hasn't grown in 15 years. Now, why? Well, we stopped having kids, right? And as a result of that, our population pyramid turned into a population column, as the case may be. And we've been talking about this, right? Before the pandemic, a bunch of economists got together, and they said, hey, how do you make the economy grow faster? Have more immigrants. There you go. Simple, right? By the way, they also told them to reform the income tax code, increase the Social Security age, and reduce government deficits. Again, they don't listen to economists, okay? That's exact opposite of what we did. Now, the good news is immigration has been coming. Yes, it has. Immigration's bounced back from the very low level it was at. It's about 1 million a year, of course, according to the official statistics. But the official statistics are wrong. We have some new data from the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, that actually shows us that it's about 3 million people per year. Why are they coming here? Because we have an incredibly strong economy, an incredibly tight labor market, and by the way, with those smartphones, they can go exactly where their relatives are and settle in and get a job without much of a problem. So they are coming here one way or the other. And that's exactly why you see the unemployment rate start to drift up, because we're getting this whole new surge of people in here. And this is a great article from the Wall Street Journal, was the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post? Can't remember. The economy is roaring. Immigration is a key reason. Of course it is. They're filling jobs and they're buying stuff. Yes, they're contributing to the overall growth rate. I mean, it's exactly why, if you ask Americans, they will tell you that immigration is the top problem for the third straight month. Now, I will acknowledge that having millions of people coming over the border in a, of course, uncontrolled manner, not good. And we probably should, shall we say, have a little better way of allowing these folks to get in here. But we can also appreciate that we need people, and these people are helping the U.S. economy grow. And by the way, if you're hoping to have Social Security and Medicare in 20 years, you might want these people to stay and have a bunch of kids. So that's why, again, going back to presidential debate, they spent, let me see, how many minutes on immigration reform? 0 again. So this is the issue. We need to fix our immigration system, our legal system, but we don't even talk about it. It's not even part of the narrative, and this is our problem. Good policy starts with the right narrative. Now, in terms of regional growth, look, California's issue, we don't have people. Our labor force has grown by a paltry 13,000 in 5 years. We've added 640,000 payroll jobs. That's actually a pretty good trick. Why does Texas grow faster than us? They build housing, we don't. It's not complicated. And yes, our population has been declining, but we talked about this. They're not fleeing. If people were fleeing California, housing vacancy rates would be going up, right? Flee, up. They're not fleeing. And as Niree already brought up, here's the key. Yes, there are fewer people in California. There are more households in California. The real key here is Californians are spreading out. And when you spread out in a fixed housing stock, somebody gets pushed out. They get pushed out of the state, they get pushed out of the county, or worst case scenario, they get pushed into the alley. But they are being pushed on the basis of the fact that we won't build enough housing just to meet internal demand, much less to allow more people to move into our fair state. And you can see it all over the place. Every area is seeing declines in people per household. Think of the Bay Area, for example. Look at Santa Clara County. And Santa Clara County has actually added 8% to its housing stock over the course of the last decade. People per household dropped by 7%. What did that mean? The vast majority of brand new houses in San Jose are being filled up by people who are simply moving out from where they lived in San Jose. You have to build even more than that to keep up with demand. So the issue here is housing, housing, housing. Now, why are people spreading out? Well, there's another part of this, don't forget, because it's not static. You say people are moving out, but really people are moving in and people are moving out. Who's moving out? Lower income families, particularly lower income families with kids, because when you have kids, you become incredibly house cost sensitive. Who's moving in? Higher income people and people without kids who are not so housing cost sensitive. And of course, what that means is fewer people per household. We have an older economy. Look at the difference between young and old. Look at the difference in education. We're older and more educated, that's great, but at the same time, where are the young people? Where are the youthful workers? Where are the blue-collar workers who are the backbone of every single economy? Well, they can't afford to live here. And the places that are growing in California, with labor force growth, it's the inland parts of the state, which is why Stockton, the Inland Empire, and Fresno, some of the fastest growing economies. And the Bay Area right now is in an existential panic over the fact that they're seeing tech jobs go away. But let's understand the real problem in the Bay Area right now. Tech jobs are actually 13% of overall household employment in the Bay Area, which, by the way, is the highest it's ever been outside the last couple of years. The real issue is there's nobody higher, and as a result of that, wages in the Bay Area are the highest they've ever been. Here's a simple problem in the Bay Area. You don't expand your labor force, Well, how does tech possibly grow there? You just can't fit anybody else in. Now, there's a term for this, by the way. It's called Dutch disease. By the way, Dutch disease goes back to a conversation about the Netherlands back in the 50s and 60s. In the 1950s, Netherlands had one of the strongest manufacturing sectors in Europe, incredibly powerful. By the end of 1960, their manufacturing sector was decimated. It was empty. Why? Oil. They discovered oil in the North Sea, and the next thing you know, every strapping young manufacturing worker donned his life vest, jumped on a boat, and started working on the rigs. And of course, because those factories couldn't hire anybody, those factories simply fell apart. Now, it's great in the short run. When oil prices are high, it's wonderful. But what happens when oil prices fall? Well, now the local economy has nothing but oil. There's nothing to fall back on. And when oil prices did inevitably drop, it was the Dutch economy that was absolutely hammered by it. And if you really want to know what's going on in the Bay Area, it's not oil, it's big tech, it's Google, it's Apple. These are the guys, Facebook, Meta, they're the ones spreading out. They're hiring everybody in sight. If they're doing great, the Bay's great. If they're not doing so well, they're not doing so well, and the Bay Area sags. You have to grow. You have to diversify. You have to avoid the Dutch disease. And the only way you do that, housing. Over and over and over again. Even on the rental front, everybody's panicked about renters. Did you know, look at the share of renters late on rate. It's actually coming down. Some of the lowest numbers we've ever seen. We don't have struggling renters in the state. How about this in the right-hand side? We always talk about how California pays more than the rest of the nation in terms of median rent-to-income ratios. True, but on the right-hand side, how about we look at post-rent income? Take my fair city of Los Angeles. We have a 36% median rent-to-income ratio, which is 20% higher than the nation. However, after you pay your rent, you make $37,600 in LA. The rest of the nation, you make $30,000. So even if you pay more of your rent, you still make more income. Yet, what do we talk about? We need rent control. And no, we do not need rent control. You want to get more housing, rent control doesn't work. It's not about affordability, it's about supply. And of course, who's doing better? I already talked about the falls in inequality we're seeing in the nation and state, and you can see it here. People with less income are seeing more more education than people with more education. Graduate degrees have only seen their increases in income of 13% in the last 5 years. Those without a high school degree, 21%. And the biggest increases in weekly earnings are happening in the inland parts of the state. So really, honestly, things are better for lower income Californians, and we should be celebrating this. But of course, $18 an hour is on the ballot yet again. What problem are we solving for? Now you say, well, it's costless. That's what they tell us. It's costless. It's not costless. I saw a report the other day. Well, the FAST Act only caused a 3.7% increase in the price of a Big Mac. Okay, I could argue with that. I could tell you it's 7.7%. But you know, that still trivializes it. And it's not just the FAST Act and the $20 an hour minimum wage. How about the fact that California's minimum wage went from 8 to 16 in 11 years? That's a 60% increase in the real inflation-adjusted minimum wage. Our minimum wage is now higher than it's ever been by a good margin. And it is not costless. Those costs filter everywhere across the economy. Every price takes a hit. It's not just fast food. It's childcare, and it's rehabilitation centers, and it's retail, and it's some parts of manufacturing, and it's nonprofits. They all get hit by this. And when they have to increase their prices, that causes the price of other products to go up, which causes everybody to pay more. California's cost of living is the second highest in the nation outside of Washington, D.C. We're higher than Hawaii, and Hawaii has a reason to be expensive. We don't. And by the way, where have been the biggest increases in cost of living? On the right-hand side, this is our cost of living. And you can see the biggest increases are in the cheaper parts of the states. It's inland. That's a minimum wage effect. So the families that can least afford it are the ones carrying the biggest part of the burden on the minimum wage. You're moving chairs around the deck of the Titanic. You're not actually solving a problem. And there's something even more nefarious here. If you look at one thing about California, our unemployment rate is going up. Why is it going up? 16 to 19-year-olds. They can't get a job right now. Why can't they get a job? Because most 16 or 19-year-olds get a job at McDonald's. When they're not getting that job now, if a McDonald's has to pay $20 an hour, they're not going to give that kid, particularly that minority kid from an at-risk neighborhood, they're not going to give him a chance. They're going to hire an adult. And suddenly, you see a bunch of kids who desperately need work experience not getting it. And that causes long-run problems. Study after study shows us how important work experience is, particularly for at-risk youths. And we are denying them this opportunity on the basis of pursuing a policy that isn't really doing any good. All on the basis of a broken narrative. Where does this go? Now, even when it comes to talking about the budget, right? We keep hearing over and over again this giant deficits. But understand our deficits are because the state has dramatically increased its spending over the last couple of years. That's why we have deficits. Not, of course, because our economy is doing bad. How about the Fed? That's another bizarre narrative. According to the Fed, they didn't cause inflation. I still can't believe they said that's their official line. It had nothing to do with us. Nothing here, people, right? But of course, people get so upset about prices, they have to dodge the bullet. They have to pretend it was something else. With that being said, with all, they have started to back off. It took them a while. We all heard about rate cuts at the end of last year, but they said no. They went in 60 Minutes. They said no. Finally, just a couple months ago, they came out and they said, yes, we're going to cut. We got that half-point cut. But the one thing I want to keep in mind on this particular front is that the Federal Reserve is not trying to stimulate the economy. Hey, remember I told you there were two things they were doing. They increased the federal funds rate, but they've also been engaging in quantitative tightening. Quantitative tightening is when they shrink the money supply. And they do so by, of course, selling off assets on the Fed book. Well, guess what? They are continuing, they cut the federal funds rate, but they are continuing quantitative tightening. So even here, it's not what you think. What they're really trying to do is uninvert the yield curve, because the yield curve has been inverted for 2 years. And ask anybody in banking. This is not healthy, right? Simple as that. So their efforts here, of course, is quantitative tightening to yank the top end of the curve up, cut the federal funds rate to get the bottom end of the curve down, and try to unwind that yield curve. This is what they're tactically leaning in on. Now, what does that mean for you? Well, it means mortgage rates are not going to fall, but the one-year Treasury will continue to fall as you see these things unwind. And it also means, of course, that credit constraints are going to remain there in place. It's going to be tough to get credit over the course of the next couple of years because of these ongoing efforts. Again, it's not quite what the narrative would suggest. But keep something in mind. This is the Fed's, only one of the Fed's policies, only one of the Fed's problems that they created. They also created that massive asset bubble. They also have allowed an even bigger increase in the deficit. We talked about these issues, as the case may be, and all of those are leading to growing imbalances on the external account. You're watching our current account deficit open, and you're watching our net investment position become more and more negative. Over and over, you see the long-run implications that are not good of our current federal government policies. This cannot last. So, with all that being said, it's just a couple days. Yep, the election. Now, I get it. I just heard everybody go, what's he going to say? But here's the key. I get it. Very controversial. And, if we really made people, red if you're for Harris and green if you're for Trump. Don't do that. We don't need fisticuffs in the room, okay? Leave them down. But with that being said, here's the key. From my point of view, there's not much difference. I consider their views on the economy. They both view the economy as being absolutely terrible, and it's the other person's fault. Well, the economy isn't terrible, and it doesn't need to be saved by you, right? We already pointed that out. Fiscal policy. We desperately need to fix our deficits. What are they talking about? Tax cuts and increases in spending. Slightly different balance, by the way. Trump wants more tax cuts, and Harris wants more increases in spending. But no matter how you look at it, both these folks seem to be trying to increase the deficit, not shrink it. And when it comes to, of course, industrial policy or immigration policy, what's the real problem in our nation, particularly with our industrial system? We don't have enough workers. The workers we have are too expensive. It's very hard to be competitive. We clearly need more workers. What are they talking about? Closing the border. Closing the border. And in terms of industry, well, Trump wants tariffs and Harris wants to subsidize startups. Well, how about we fix our immigration system? because that'd be the best thing that would ever happen for U.S. manufacturing. But they're not talking about it. And that's the key. I don't see a lot of difference here. And that's the biggest worry of all. Look, we're not out of the woods because we were never in the woods. The economy's fine. We're 4 years into this expansion, and it is going to continue. The headwinds will intensify. Keep an eye on Fed deficits and those asset markets and our external imbalances. The three big indicators, the U.S. dollar, household savings rates, and of course the yield curve, right? As for California, we just continue to try and prove the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? We have to start focusing on the idea that many of our local economies are suffering from Dutch disease. And the only way you're going to solve Dutch disease is housing supply, housing supply, housing supply, housing supply, and we still haven't fixed it. We're still not delivering the housing supply, and that's because the narrative is running amok. It's all about the narrative. And on that front, the fact that the narrative and the reality are off base is the human condition. It's been with us since the dawn of time, right? But with that being said, there's something particularly difficult, problematic, serious about today's narrative reality. And the only thing I can really pin my finger on is the internet. Now, we all kind of know this, but why, right? Well, this came from the Pew Charitable Trust. New information platforms feed the ancient instinct people have to find information that syncs with their perspectives. People tend to seek information that aligns with their views. The information environment will not improve. The problem is human nature. Folks, we don't live in the information age. We live in the age of confirmation bias. We live in a world where no matter what silliness you believe, you will find someone on the net who believes in it with you. And they have the proof. And so we go to the internet not to find out what's actually going on, but simply to find someone to make us feel better about our current set of opinions. That is the biggest problem of all, and that's a problem we all have. We have to remember, it is easier to fool people than convince them they have been fooled. And that is the biggest problem. Look, how do you fix this? Start with yourself. The next time you go online to look up some information, don't look up stuff that you already believe in. Look at the stuff you don't. And with an open mind, think about what they're saying, rightly or wrongly. If we do not allow for the fact that we have a confidence in our opinions that we don't deserve, it's going to be very difficult for us to get ourselves out of this mess. It starts with you. And with that being said, I got to say I miss you, Bob. And that's, of course, the Bob pre-CCEF. And the Bob, of course, I shared the stage with here for over a decade. And, well,
woo! That was a tearjerker at the end. I wasn't anticipating that one. Thank you, Chris. I miss him too. Gosh darn it. Wow, I had a lot of takeaways from that. I think the biggest one is that we need someone to create Ozempic for the elephant, I think was the punchline there. All right, folks. Well, I'm not going to ask you who you voted for, but we do want to kind of get your opinion on a few things in the room. We're going to start out nice and soft, okay? So green card if you're a Whole Foods fan, red if you're more of a Sprouts person. Green card, red, Sprouts. Okay, a lot of Whole Foods in the crowd. Okay, the whole Amazon acquisition didn't deter you. I love it. Let's talk about work from home, okay? Green if it's the best thing ever. Red if it's gone a little too far. We need to bring it back. Oh, a lot of red, a lot of red. And the greens are all like really enthusiastic, up in the air. I love that. How about building heights? Let's get real. All right, green if we need to go higher, red if we need to stop. Building heights. Okay, mostly green. That was pretty clear. Here's an interesting question. So, I work with a lot of folks in their finances, and I've heard kind of a narrative that it's time to just, pause on making big financial decisions because of the election. And regardless of what that person's narrative is, a lot of people are pausing. Green if you're not pausing because of the election. Red if you are kind of thinking, I'm just going to wait and see how this shakes out. Okay, mostly green. You guys are very, very brave. Beautiful. All right, well, that was very interesting. I'm so tempted. Okay, how about we do this? How about we just do this? Not who did you vote for, okay, but red if you think Trump will win, regardless of who you voted for or what you want to happen. Green if you think Harris will win, objectively. Ooh, some very tentative arms and a lot of green though in the room. I think we probably have a little confirmation bias here in San Luis Obispo happening, quite possibly. But okay, well we are going to engage in some Q&A in just a minute. So if you haven't submitted a question, now is your final chance to do so. We did get a lot, so I want to warn you that I can't guarantee we're going to get to all of your questions today. But before we get to Q&A, I would like to invite Karen Tillman back up to the stage to announce the winner that you selected of our 3 Minutes to Win It pitch contest. Yes, I realize that.
I thought I might accidentally really ruin the surprise and walk with the check the wrong way. Glad I didn't do that. Thank you all for voting, and I won't belabor who won. So congratulations, McCall from Mense. Woo.
Wow, congratulations. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Amazing. Well done. Well, all right. Our final sponsor video of the day from KSBY. Let's hear from them, and then we're going to start our Q&A. Thanks so much.
KSBY is dedicated to serving our community.
That's why we're focused on important issues and stories that impact people who live and work here on the Central Coast.
We continue to dig deeper and produce stories that are specific to our neighborhoods. We cut through the red tape and get to the bottom line, which is how news topics, issues, and events will impact your lives.
We also highlight neighbors who are making a difference in our communities.
And with more reporters, we can showcase the changing needs of our neighborhoods and focus on meaningful connections to better serve our partners and viewers.
We're once again proud to partner with the Central Coast Economic Forecast.
Excellent. Thank you, KSBY. All right, Dr. Thornberg, Dr. Kodaverdian, would you like to come up to the stage? We've got some zingers here for you. All right, so you touched on this briefly. I'll start with you since you came up to the stage first. Tariffs.
Yeah.
So we did hear a little bit from both political candidates about tariffs. They seem to be gaining in popularity. What are your thoughts on tariffs as an effective economic policy? Are they inflationary?
Yeah, am I on? No, I don't hear. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, good. All right. Tariffs are a terrible idea. Now, mind you, sometimes they can be good. I will say this. I actually appreciated the tariffs that were put on China. They don't play fair in the global trade sandbox. Someone needed to stand up to them. Trump did it, hit him with some tariffs, and I think ultimately they didn't do all that much harm, in part because of how our relationship between our two economies operates. But that was very specific. And when you start talking about broad-based tariffs, That's when things really start to feed in. In particular, one of the things to keep in mind is that we slapped a bunch of tariffs on metal products. And that really started to show up in prices, particularly for things like automobiles and whatnot. So in a sense, you could say that tariffs are, for the most part, bad. Some are not too bad, and some are very, very bad. But in general, the point here is, why are we doing it in the first place? Right? I mean, there's this idea that somehow or other we're going to help the U.S. economy by making stuff more expensive. And that never quite makes sense to me, right, as the case may be. So I think we need to lean against that. But this is a world where everybody loves to hear that there's a one-line X-friendly way of solving every problem we have. And that's the problem with these kind of things. Oh, tariffs, yay! And we don't think about how complicated and how difficult they can make the economy.
And is this on? Okay. Just to add on to that, just as Dr. Thornberg said, the point of tariffs, or the intended purpose, is to harm or make it more difficult for people in other countries to export their products to the US. But what ends up happening is that it raises prices for US consumers, and it makes it more expensive for the producers that are buying the raw materials from the other countries. Yeah. So it has a lot of unintended consequences for people living in the US. So yeah, as he said, the ones for China, I mean, those seemed reasonable, but expanding tariffs and making them more broad-based, not really a good idea.
Okay. All right, Dr. Kodaverdian, let's see, question for you. You showed growth of SLO County relative to Santa Barbara and some others that were maybe doing a little bit better. Were you able to glean anything from other counties, things that they're doing that maybe we need to put into effect? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I didn't look deeply into what the other counties are doing differently. I mean, it would probably be some combination of what the contributions to their GDP are, what their comparative advantage is in, and all that. So no, I haven't looked into it in depth.
Santa Maria is one of the few cities on the Central Coast that actually has built housing. And you see that on the 101 every single morning, with all the people who are having to come live down in Santa Maria and coming up here for work on a daily basis. So we know housing is a big part of it. Another place where you see housing playing a big role in some better numbers is in Santa Rosa. I've talked about Santa Rosa's plan many years ago. They had a big fire, lost a bunch of housing. They leaned in on a high-density plan. It took them a little while to get it off the ground, but it's starting to pay dividends, and you are starting to see more multifamily sprouting up there. And again, it's a lesson because it's good for the local economy. You do see other sectors other than wine starting to grow in the Sonoma County. And by the way, it's also really good for Cal State Sonoma, because there's more housing for their students, which again is an incredibly important problem. I mean, you think about all these great young folks coming out of Cal Poly SLO, and they can't possibly stay here. They almost have to leave to get that first job because, again, there's a lack of housing and a lack of those kind of jobs that are for those first grads just coming out of school.
Good points. Came back to housing and you tied it right back. Let's talk about inflation. So forecasting it out in the future, kind of given what we're seeing with economic data, do you think inflation is under control? Will we have a repeat of the 70s where it went down and then it came roaring back?
Yeah, look, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Milton Friedman said that many, many years ago. And what happened in the 1970s is they didn't really ever stop printing the money. If you look at the data, really for an entire decade, every single year they produced a little bit too much money. This time around, it was a different kind of shock to the system, if you will. They poured in an insane amount of money in a very short period of time, and now they are yanking it out. And that's the key. Again, go back to the idea that quantitative tightening is continuing. It's continuing to come down. As quantitative comes down, that keeps the money supply in control, and that keeps prices ultimately in control. So no, as long as they maintain their current path on the quantitative front, you don't have to worry about this again. The real issue for me from an inflationary standpoint goes back, many years, when I first was in grad school in the 90s, I remember all these kind of older economists would talk about the dual mandate of the Fed, and it's never going to work, and someday they're just going to inflate their way out of the debt problem. And I went, oh, you old fogies, what are you talking about, right? That's not how it works anymore. And yet, here we are today in 2024, and I recognize that they were all right. But now we don't call it printing money, now we call it quantitative easing. And honestly, when they get around to when we do have that federal deficit crisis, whenever it does actually kick in, almost assuredly that's where they're going to go. They're going to go ahead and go back to quantitative easing because it's a good way of taking the pressure off the government in the short run, but that will inevitably lead to inflation. Now, of course, the key here is this is a generational moment. It's the old argument is if you forget history, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's exactly what we're leaning into right now. And I would tell you, it's funny, some people ask me, like, what do you think's wrong with economics education today? And the honest to God answer is they need a lot more history. If you forget history, if you don't pay attention to it, if you don't have somebody that are helping you create these linkages between the past and today, it's very hard for us to see what's really going on. It's incredibly important to have that element of context in our world, and we've lost it completely.
Yeah. It doesn't sell. People don't hit the
Exactly,
like button
I know,
on history.
I know.
Yeah. Dr. Kodaverdian, this is a data question that I'm interested in as well, but it's specifically around the work from home movement. You know, I think the narrative is that a lot of folks moved into SLO County out of the area during the pandemic because it's such a wonderful place to live, and with the idea of remote work opening up. How are those people reflected in the labor numbers? Are they even showing up in the SLO County labor numbers, or are they being attributed to where the headquarters is for that company?
Oh, okay. So the labor numbers are from household data, so they would be reflected in the numbers, in the labor force numbers. But yeah, we're not seeing the growth reflected in the labor force, obviously, because we saw that steep drop off with the pandemic, and it hasn't really recovered since then. So if they did move here, then they displaced people that were living here before them. Yeah, so we're not seeing an increase in labor force. Obviously, we're just seeing it staying low we're seeing it low where it was with the pandemic.
Interesting.
Well, let me just, the thing here is labor force is falling. It's exactly right. And remember, labor force is measured by where you live, right? Your payroll numbers are measured on where you work. So if you happen to be a remote worker living in San Luis Obispo and working in LA, for example, you would be a payroll worker in LA and you'd be a household worker here. So if you saw a bunch of people moving here to work remotely, you'd see your labor force doing this and your payroll is doing this. It's not what's happening. You have your payrolls going up and your household going down. So quite the opposite. It almost seems like there's a diminishment in people like that. Now, it's a little tricky how you compare these things, and there's commuters and everything else. But to me, this work from home thing never really panned out because I don't think it was ever all that realistic. I think there's very, very few people who can truly work remotely in the way we think about. Most sectors, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Not effectively.
Yeah. Oh, we've got, someone's holding up a green.
There you go, there you go, yeah.
That's a here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Feel free to bang the table.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
Let's see. I think I know the answer to this question, but gosh, we put so much into our Cal Poly, Cuesta, and Hancock students, but most leave for opportunities elsewhere. How do we keep them?
Say the magic word.
Housing.
Housing. Yeah, there you go.
Hey.
Multifamily housing. Thank you.
Multifamily housing,
Yeah.
Dr. Kodaverdian, you advocated for keeping Diablo open.
Yes.
So can you talk about how Diablo impacts our local economy? Like what effects does it have? I mean, I know that the county gets some property tax from its operations. I mean, what else? How else does it affect our local economy?
Yeah, so obviously it's contributing to labor income. That's one. Taxes that are being paid not just locally, but it's also contributing to state taxes and to federal taxes in terms of income taxes as well as other types of taxes. So there's a whole array of industries that are supported by the fact that Diablo is here. It's not just Diablo itself, and that's true for a lot of different businesses you might look at. The impact extends far beyond the business itself. There's a lot of intermediate goods that are purchased, intermediate services that are purchased. So there's like a ripple effect throughout the economy by the fact that Diablo is here and continues to operate here.
Very good. So we had a number of folks write in. I think they were surprised by some of the data around inequality and perhaps folks on the lower end of the economic spectrum actually doing better lately. And I think for that argument, you were using a lot of wage growth data. But what about the wealth gap? Is what's happening to the wealth gap? We heard about the wealth gap. Typically, wealthy people own stocks and assets that go up.
Yeah. It's a great question, but I did show you a little bit of wealth data. Here's the breakdown of wealth. Actually, the bottom 50% have done better than the top 50% in terms of growth rate and wealth. Okay, so actually, we are seeing a diminishment in wealth inequality. But with that being said, it's really subtle. First of all, if you look at the bottom 20% of folks, they're still in the hole. And we still have a group of folks who really have almost nothing, and there's a lot of work to do dealing with them. And then even when you look at the top 50%, overall it's down, but there's a little bit of a gap going on, because when you look at the top 50%, what you have is basically 51% to 99.9%, they're kind of flat, maybe down just a little bit. And that 0.1% is way up. So when you think about wealth inequality in the United States, understand it's largely being driven by that 0.1%. And yes, there has to be something done about this. It is an enormous problem. They're warping the economic system. They're warping the political system. They're also warping our sense of reality, because you can't pick up a paper without seeing some billionaire's latest hijinks being shoved in your face, whether it's Musk or a Kardashian or whatever else. And, you know, we need policy to deal with this, but it's not minimum wage. Minimum wage isn't going to solve this. Higher income taxes aren't going to solve this. You have to have a whole other system for dealing with the uber wealthy. And candidly, again, all the conversations about this are really off base, in part because they are very good at distracting the narrative, driving the narrative in another direction.
Yeah.
So it's complicated, a little better, a little worse. It all depends on how you look at it.
Okay. Well, we are coming to the end of our time, and before we let you go, I would love to hear one recommendation that each of you have for SLO County, for the business leaders, the policymakers of SLO County. One thing, maybe, if it's housing, then you can say housing, but then you got to give a second thing.
All right.
Okay? All right, so who wants to go first? One recommendation.
Bring the Madonna into LA, please.
All right, bring the Madonna into LA. I love it.
All right.
Was your first housing, though?
Yeah,
or?
it was housing.
Okay,
Yeah.
So housing and then...
And also Diablo, not closing Diablo.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right.
Number 2.
Look, local policymakers. Two things, obviously, housing, multifamily housing. That's my obvious one. But what's the other thing? Go Dodgers. Can I do that one?
You can do that one. Thank
All
you
right,
so
go
much.
Dodgers.
Ladies
2
and
feet.
gentlemen, Dr. Chris Thornberg, Dr. Niree, Kodaverdian, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks. What a fun time it's been with you today. Thank you so much. I genuinely meant it. Thank you so much for caring about our community and for being here today. Have a wonderful afternoon, a great weekend, and keep a lookout for that survey. We need your feedback. Thanks so much.